scam trial lawyers, and for the most part that's for good reason. But I want to give you, at least from a perspective of, from my side of the fence, why I think what I do matters, and why I think what I do matters specifically with respect to food safety. The reality in America, although we hear from our politicians and from industry that we have the safest food supply in the world, is that we poison a lot of people. A quarter of our population is sickened every year by foodborne illness. 325,000 people are sickened, and there are at least 5,000 and probably more deaths. Medical costs alone for foodborne illness is in the United States reach nearly $7 billion a year. So it's a serious threat to our nation, it's a serious threat to public health. You know, we're involved with pretty much every major foodborne illness outbreak that occurs, most of them not in the state of Washington. But specifically with your question regarding imports, the way I explain it to Chinese business people is that we may not be able to sue you in Chinese courts, but we make it expensive for the US importer, and then if that cost becomes too great for them, they'll look for another source. So it's more often an economic driver of going after an importer. But the conventional wisdom, in my opinion, is wrong, that most of our problems don't stem from imported food products, and they mostly, frankly, are homegrown. I've never sued somebody who hasn't poisoned anybody. So if you don't poison people, I don't get to sue you. It's a very straightforward equation. So wishful thinking does not help. It doesn't matter if you're a good citizen. It doesn't matter if you're hoping that in fact you don't poison people. Wishful thinking doesn't help. And to drive that fact home, if a manufacturer produces a product that causes someone to be ill, they're at fault, period. 99% of what I do comes from industrialized, mass-produced agriculture. And that doesn't necessarily mean, you know, CAFOs, but it's mass-produced food that gets shipped in a variety of states. It doesn't mean that small outbreaks don't happen or that Farmer Bob doesn't poison his neighbors. They happen. They just happen on such small scale that we probably don't notice it. One of the really interesting things about outbreaks is in almost every outbreak that occurs in the United States, by the time we are hearing about them, whether it be the Jack in the Box outbreak or the cookie dough outbreak, the peanut butter outbreak, you pick it. Next time you hear about that outbreak, usually by the time you're hearing about it, the outbreak has been over for months. The epidemiological curve, which you'll see, you know, if you can imagine sort of a rough bell-shaped curve going along this bar graph, sometimes it just takes forever for how an outbreak develops, that health departments become involved, that stool cultures are done, that assessments are done, that people are questioned, and that ultimately it leads to a probable source. It sometimes takes a lot longer than you would hope. The technology that the CDC, local and state health departments now have for yanking the genetics out of these bugs and turning them into these little, very interesting things that look like the barcode on the back of a cereal box, and then uploading them digitally and being able to compare them. And then on average, not always, but on average, each outbreak will have the same identical cereal box barcode, that these bacteria are that discrete in each outbreak that you can generalize when you see that bar graph, that each one of those people that are being counted are in fact ill people that are genetically similar, that the stool cultures found in those individuals were genetically similar. It tells you a lot about now going quarrying and asking what kinds of foods they ate, where they've been, what they've been doing, where they have, in fact, been visiting. When the Ebola E. coli case happened, just shortly after the last Jack in the Box case went to trial, Odwalla, and they probably sell it here on campus. Odwalla was pretty much a West Coast phenomenon back in 1998, 97, 96. And the reason they couldn't ship it very far is because it was unpasteurized. And they couldn't get it too far away from their facilities where they made it. But Odwalla had gone public, and the owners were watching their stock price, and they were watching their bank accounts. And they wanted to find new markets to market their product. And they reached out to the U.S. Army and to see if they could sell the U.S. Army their apple juice. The U.S. Army sent a team from Fort Sam Houston out to their facility, and what they found was, we reviewed the deficiencies noted in the report, which our inspector discussed with you at the time of the inspection. As a result, we determined that your plant sanitation program does not adequately assure product wholesomeness for military consumers. This lack of assurance prevents approval of your establishment as a source of supply for the armed forces at this time. This was 6 months before an outbreak that sickened dozens and killed a kid in Colorado. If Odwalla couldn't sell their juice to the U.S. Army, even as a biological weapon, if they couldn't sell it to the U.S. Army, what were they doing selling it as kids' apple juice and to pregnant moms? But they kept doing it. How many think that Odwalla handed this document over to me willingly? Right. What happened was, I came into the office one Saturday, my message light was on my phone, and it was, Mr. Marler, make sure you get the U.S. Army documents regarding Odwalla. And I'm like, what's happening? So I FOIA'd the U.S. Army, and some nice young Texas-sounding gentleman from Fort Sam Houston, Texas said, I was wondering when somebody was going to call. And he had all these documents, including test results. The food safety legislation that's perking its way through the House and has passed the House has been out of the Health Committee in the Senate, S510. Whether that sees the light of day, whether it ever gets signed into law by the president, I've sort of given up thinking what will happen. I think the legislation has tried very hard to accommodate the fact that a sort of a one-size-fits-all doesn't really work. But it's a it's a tough balancing act, because what happens a lot of times in small producers, when they get started, they may be small producers, but then they start to scale to make more money, to get more customers, and it becomes more problematic. And I think the legislation needs to be tweaked some to sort of accommodate, at some point you have to play by these rules. At some point you only have to play by these rules. It's really difficult to do when you're trying to do it on a nationwide basis.
Unpasteurized milk, do you believe that an informed consumer should have the right to obtain unpasteurized milk if they want to directly from the farm?
The direct answer is yes. Can I give a little bit broader explanation? It's like everything else in life, you sort of tag along your experiences. My experience with raw milk has not been a positive one. I've represented a lot of little kids who've consumed unpasteurized milk and have become severely sickened by E. coli 15787. I represent a young woman in Connecticut who is going to lose her kidneys. I represented a woman in California who got Campylobacter from raw milk and is now a quadriplegic. So I answer your question with the caveat that I think raw milk carries a lot of risk. So I think you have to allow for consenting adults to do things that you think are stupid, but you can allow them to do it in a way that at least forces them to think about it